the United States, representing Fort Hays State University in Kansas. And we work in China, so we work with Shenyang Normal University in Shenyang, China, the Center of International Business, and also half of the year in Zhengzhou at SIAS International University in Shenzhen, China. So we're going to start off our presentation. It's focused on the future, service, learning, and education. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, Mahatma Gandhi. And only a life lived in the service of others is a life worth living, Albert Einstein. We're going to start with a brief introduction and talk about the World Giving Index, which measures a charity based on three variables. And it has a little bit of a Western slant, so we're going to discuss that very briefly. We're going to talk about service learning in China and our perspectives as teachers coming from the U.S. And the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, which include poverty, hunger, gender equality, disease prevention, all the way through into global partnerships. And then we'll talk a little bit about the impact in the classroom, how to get our Chinese learners involved in this type of service or service learning. And a couple of this exploratory presentation inquires into the nature and importance of service learning and education with a sensitivity to cultural differences. The inquiry is presented by us, two international instructors, who are presenting an American degree program from Fort Hays State University to our Chinese university students. Shenyang Normal University, as I mentioned, and SIAS University in Zhengzhou. The questions guiding inquiry are: how do cultural conceptions of charity affect attitudes toward service learning programs? And how can these programs be presented in such a way to maximize their effectiveness internationally? The World Giving Index measures a couple of things. First, their monetary contributions, the time that is taken to volunteer, and people who might have just done something small, like helped a stranger. And they're all measures of individual action.
And the fact that those are all measures of individual action, we think is important because we think it tends to privilege Western nations who tend to be much more focused on what you as a person can do individually to make the world better. And we don't think this is a great measure of how charity is perceived and functions in China because it does de-emphasize collective action. It's not about what we as a group can do to solve problems together. It frames charitable giving in terms of charity and helping, as opposed to working together to achieve goals. And that has some negative connotations in China because it emphasizes, again, a higher status person giving assistance to sort of someone struggling. And in China, that can be quite embarrassing to point out that someone else is having a difficult time. Two of the three categories also focused on organized charities. We think that's important because those local reputations can vary so much. For example, in China, a local head of the Red Cross recently was found to be basically embezzling money and buying things like sports cars and fur coats. So of course, the perception of where your money goes when you give it to charity makes a radical difference in your willingness to donate. So as you can see here, these variables, for a number of reasons that we don't really have time to get into, tend to vary quite radically, depending on where you are in the world. North America, again, for example, where we're from, is to focus mostly on helping strangers, a little more emphasis on money. But over here in Central Asia, it's quite different. Time and willingness to help a stranger, much higher. Willingness to donate or ability to donate money tends to be substantially lower. Northern Africa, many people willing to help, few people willing to donate time to help with an organized charity. What we teach is mostly service learning. This is a method by which, again, we train leaders who are intended to support and help in assist their followers more than they are to sort of command in the sense, traditional conception of leadership. Service learning requires advocacy, a willingness to try to make changes happen, community engagement, a willingness to sort of work with the people in your local area, the organizations that may be there, social awareness and understanding of where the problems are in your society and what maybe you can do about them, and introspection, a willingness to think about yourself and your own role in the world. Chinese students are often hesitant, at least as approached from a traditional American curriculum, because of a number of reasons. There's a reluctance to appear critical. Again, we mentioned that sense of you don't want to be the one pointing out what's wrong with your society. A desire to avoid embarrassing others. We talked a bit about that sense of higher status versus lower status, that desire not to mention that, and negative perceptions, again, of charitable institutions locally. We found useful was to focus our classes on the Millennium Development Goals provided by the UN. Again, Panda covered these, so I'm not going to go into huge detail, but it does things like child mortality, maternal health, environmental sustainability. And we found this useful because it tends to help focus learners on collective action. It's no longer what are you going to do, but what are we going to do as a planet to help to address and solve these problems. It frames helping as a way of working together with other nations and other people to solve issues that we all have. It gives students a chance to get to participate in that conversation on a world level. And it encourages them to think about how they can think about bigger problems on a more local level, what they can do in their own time and life. What we noticed when we did this is that Chinese students became more excited, they became more creative. Projects range from things like helping to repair kindergarten playgrounds, to starting local recycling initiatives. And we think that's partially because efforts are recontextualized into something the world is working on. And this is really useful, especially for us as American instructors. Our international reputation is not always great in terms of things like arrogance, and we really want to avoid that unintended criticism of the host nation. The idea that these Americans are going to come in and tell the Chinese students how to fix their country just doesn't play very well. It's unsuccessful, it's kind of obnoxious. So when we phrase this as a problem that everybody has and not a problem that you have that you must go fix, we find that things work a lot better. And students perceive their actions to be of significance beyond the classroom. So what we really wanted to point out here, there's much more of this in the paper. International service learning instructors face a variety of local conditions. We found two, again, very dramatic differences just in terms of how charity is perceived. But this is only two nations, the US and China. And as you saw from the earlier graph, these differences extend much farther than that to different regions of the world. Different views, understandings of giving tend to have a very dramatic effect on how you view service work, what is service work, what its function should be. Focusing on global goals worked in China, but it's unlikely to work for everyone. It's not something that is going to be easily replicated in other places. So what we think is that further study on how local perception of charity can intersect with international education and leadership is really required and not something that we can sort of pass over in favor of just exporting successful curriculums from other parts of the world. Because it, again, will not likely be successful depending on the local views. Thank you. That's it.